I can't
There it
tell.
is.
The recording
I'm
has started.
presenting.
It
There we
just popped
go.
up.
Great, thank you. Okay, I am calling this meeting of the Governance Working Group to order. It is 12:32 on July 9, 2025, and I'm Barbara Neal. We are recording this meeting, and the recording will be posted to the task force webpage following the meeting. We have two working group members here. We'll run this meeting just like we do the larger task force meeting, as far as, you know, calling the roll and approving things along the way and voting to adjourn. So let's start first with a roll call of the task force members. Paul White.
Present.
Okay. Mike Dungis is not here. I did not notice that before we started. We have
Oh. Yeah, that's right. I think it was supposed to be Mike. I do see Ron. Ron is here, right?
Oh,
I am here.
okay. Ron. All right. I think we had a mix up on who was attending, but if you're good dealing with the governance topic, Ron.
I'm assuming that you need a third person. I mean, I'm happy to sit in on this. I don't know that I have a tremendous amount to share, but I'm happy to sit in and give you whatever opinion I might have, as you know that I am prone to do.
Yes.
and that's why you're here on this group.
We do know that. Why don't we do this?
I'm going to send a text message to Mike or call him on his cell. All right.
Okay.
We've
I think
been trying to schedule around Mike for 3 weeks, and
right.
thought we
Right.
had a
But
successful date.
The irony is that he was the first one to accept this meeting.
Huh.
He was this first one to do the doodle poll. So
I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute to make sure everything is clear here. This actually may have been my error in terms of invitation. Let me double check that. And I apologize for the delay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think, Paul, is it okay to pause the recording while we get this sorted out, or should we just continue to let it run?
I mean, we could take a recess, but I don't know if you stop the recording and then start it again, is it going to be two separate files?
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully this is just a brief item.
Okay.
It looks like Mike was invited. He should have the meeting. He should have the meeting invitation, and looking at tracking, he did not accept. He did not provide a response to the meeting notice, but he should have it.
Okay. And Rick said he was reaching out to him, right?
Yes.
So we'll give that a minute. Then we'll let you know, Ron, if you are kicked loose or
Hit to the curb again.
Resharing the presentation, so you should see the agenda. It's not in presentation mode yet. I'll wait until we get this straightened out.
okay.
Okay, Dom,
Yes.
Mike said forward him the invitation. He says he doesn't have it, but if you can you forward, I know you set it up. Can you forward it to him right now?
I can do that. Yes.
Thank you. He
It's
gave me a,
going to his partner
no,
address.
send it to mdongers@rutlandcity.org.
Okay, got that one too.
All right.
So that has been forwarded. He should have it. And here he is.
Okay, great. Hi, Mike.
Hi, I'm sorry to make you all wait. I didn't have an invite, so I
Oh.
apologize.
Yeah, there was some confusion there. We apologize for that as well. And Ron, I think in order to keep this just the working group that was originally planned, why don't we have you drop off? Sorry for the inconvenience to you too with the schedule.
Thanks for your support, Ron.
That is absolutely fine. I will go and have lunch.
Okay.
You all enjoy yourselves, and
All right.
the next time you need me to get on a meeting for 7.5 minutes, I am available.
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
Bye,
Good
everybody.
to know.
Bye,
Thank you.
Ron.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, we have assembled correctly. So here we are. So I was just calling the roll, Mike, when I realized that you weren't here and Ron was. So Paul White has acknowledged his presence, and would you please acknowledge yours?
I am present.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
And also on the call, of course, are our project management partners, Rick and Dom and Elizabeth from Televate. And I see we have one member of the public on the call. Travis, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us who you're affiliated with, if you'd like? We're not hearing you, Travis.
I'm not hearing him either, but I can tell you that Travis is chief of the Newport City Police Department.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I didn't want to guess. So, Travis, I don't know if there's something wrong with your mic, but when we get to public comment, if you want to share anything, we'll try again, or we'll do it through chat. So, okay. Before we get started, I do need to make one adjustment to the agenda that was posted on the website. It did not include, as the first item, approval of the agenda. So my change is to add that to the agenda. And if there's no objection to doing that, I'll just move on to whether or not task force members think there need to be any changes to the agenda. Okay. Hearing nothing, then we will consider it approved. We would move on to approval of the minutes if we had any. This is the first governance meeting, so we'll not have to do this agenda item this time. And I will now hand this back to Rick or Dom, whoever wants to start first, to take us through this work.
All right. Thank you, Barb. I'll start off quickly, moving ahead, just to show everyone where we are in terms of the system planning document. Our objective is to review this section of the system planning document, and that's section 3.5, which addresses governance and provides governance options for the task force to consider. a newly updated schedule of those review of those specific sections of the document is shown here. We had some delay in getting meetings scheduled, so we have moved things out. You'll see, of course, we're in the second week of July, and we recently had the first meeting of the Tier 3 Policy and Operations Regionalization Group, and this is our first meeting of the governance group. We anticipate this taking several weeks into the middle of August until we come to identify the priorities and potential recommendation. You can see some other working groups are also operating in parallel. And then later on in the schedule, we've identified the physical regionalization group, working group, which will start later in July and into October. We anticipate that being one with a large amount of activity. And then following those, there'll be funding and timeline. So the focus on the governance working group, as we mentioned, is section 3.5 in the document. Televate is acting as the facilitator, and we have the 3 task force members there who are all present. We appreciate your time today. And we've identified potential additional stakeholders should there be a need based on what the recommendations are from the group here. As we see this, the goal of this working group is to develop priorities and preliminary recommendations for a governance structure to administer and guide regional and statewide communications policy, standards, procedures, technologies, etc., for public safety, and to present that to the task force for review, discussion, and hopefully a recommendation from the task force. That is what our goal is for this group. And Televate has developed this presentation with some detail. We've extracted detail from the system planning report that was developed by MCP, and we intend on reviewing that today and getting into review of some of the options that were presented and determining what the group's feelings are on each of those options and what additional information is needed and additional steps in order to develop the priorities and a preliminary recommendation.
And Don, before you move on, I'd like to add in a couple of thoughts here.
Please.
So much appreciation for all of you for the time you're putting into this effort. The governance working group is kind of a foundation. Even if you look at the interoperability continuum, which is kind of the Bible, so to speak, of public safety communications. Governance is the foundation. Without a strong governance, without a codified and a governance structure, it's very difficult to serve a large population without including them into the planning and ongoing operations of whatever the final structure of Vermont communications is that results as a result of that occurs as a result of the task force. So today's meeting is important. The meetings that we're having is important. It's an opportunity for us to have an open dialogue as we review the recommendations and findings of that MCP has inserted for governance into their report. And I certainly want we want this to be an open dialogue discussion. We're going to capture the meeting minutes and notes and the action items that come out of this. And those action items, may be for Televate to go and gather some additional information, to talk to some other representations. As you'll see as we go through the meeting, we identify, a previous governance structure that state had developed by the governor had created a statewide body, and there are other governance structures that we may be able to reference in Vermont. And so, do we don't want to close out that there may be, there's some good structures that MCP recommended, and then there's others that the state may have already in existence that we should assess whether or not the pieces of those other structures might be appropriate. So open discussion, and thanks again for your participation. And so let's roll forward.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Initially, there were a number of findings that MCP documented as part of this process. Part of its task to develop the system planning document. They identified a number of state trends. And I understand this is a little bit wordy. I apologize for that, but you can see these key state trends. The first relates to the existing communication centers, and the organization and governance structures varied widely. We will go through a tabulated result of the summarizing all the communication centers and which ones did report that they have an existing governance structure. You see, it was not a large percentage of those existing today.
Well, and can I chime in on that?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I tend to be a cynic, but we say that 48% of them report that they operate currently under some form of governance agreement, but we're assuming that their survey responses are correct. I mean, what they consider to be operating under a formal governance structure, someone looking from the outside in might not consider their current structure to be an actual governance structure.
I think that's a valid statement, Paul. Yes,
I think I would go so far as to say I don't know if there are any dispatch centers in the state currently operating that truly have a governance structure where the stakeholders all have anything more than just courtesy input as to how things are operated.
Well, one item that may come out of this, and we can discuss at the appropriate time, but we can work with MCP to identify if they collected any specific governance documents during their interviews, and we can identify those and have those for review by the working group. If not, we can reach out to those that did report they have a structure and see if there's anything they can provide us.
Yeah, let's be sure we capture that as an action item.
As Paul was talking, it occurred to me that, and this is probably in the report, but I don't want to scan through it right now. We need to make sure it's very clear to people what we mean by governance structure. What are the components of it that need to be there, and according to who, right? Because that might eliminate some confusion.
Right. I'll give an example. One of the ones I'm most familiar with is Lamoille County. I know that Roger has a board representing all the towns that he serves, and he brings them together periodically to provide feedback on the service that they provide. But when it really comes right down to it, what the sheriff says goes. They can provide input, and I think he's very good about listening to that input, but he's not bound by it in any way.
So they're more advisory than
Right.
What's the other word? Non-advisory, more
right.
They don't have much authority.
Right. I mean, the only authority they have is if they don't like the way things are going, they can pull out and stop paying.
Right.
But then they have to find some other dispatch source.
Right. So I think a lot of definition needs to go in. Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to follow up with what you said, Barb. I mean, I think the definition of a governance structure needs to be sure that, we understand what we mean by a formal governance agreement, its structure and model. So I think I'm documenting that, perhaps as, an item that we could be sure that we provide back to the a definition of what we mean by governance for this program.
Yes, I think that's an appropriate action item. Summarizing some of the other trends that are shown here is that some of the agencies operate under the governance of the local municipality or their police department, as many of the communication centers we've seen are organized under the police department. MCP noted the trend is the absence of standardized organizational frameworks among a lot of the communication centers, although they do have a mix of both strengths and weaknesses in terms of their leadership. They do point out that the state's 911 system is governed under a single statewide system that supports the PSAPs, the Communication Center designated at PSAP, and governs the 911 call handling portion of that. And I'm sure Barb is well aware of that.
I am.
Yes.
I know they don't list out everything that the board's responsible for, but it does include
Right.
an element, IT management, the GIS database, of course, and
Right.
all kinds of compliance issues. So,
Right. And then they point out here, of course, that it addresses only those 6 PSAPs, the 6 communication centers within the state that are PSAPs, does not extend to the dispatch-only centers or even extend to the dispatch portion of those communication centers, and of course not to the 6 out-of-state centers.
So
Correct.
Barb, could you provide us a link or provide us a copy of I'm assuming you have a written governance agreement that the PSAPs sign on to. And you meet regularly? I mean, is there anything you could provide a link to your site where it's at and we could review it? I mean, the rationale being that one, a key aspect of public safety communications in Vermont is functioning under a governance agreement, and that would potentially be one model that could be considered as we go forward, maybe in total or pieces of it. I mean, we need to certainly learn from what you've done and the pros and cons of that model, if there are any. But I think that would be valuable to this effort.
yes, I can certainly provide, a link to all of that information. Quickly, though, the authority of the board is defined in statute, so I can send you a link to that, which basically establishes what the board can and cannot do, including the appointing of an executive director and the hiring of staff and all of that. And then we do have call handling agreements or memorandums of understanding with each PSAP for the call handling portion of this work. And that agreement lays out what the PSAP's responsibilities are, what our responsibilities are, and is signed off on by everyone involved. Then we also have actually defined in statute is the relationship that we have with each and every town in Vermont, so that we can obtain and maintain the GIS and addressing information that's crucial to the system, and responder information that's crucial to the system. So I will pull together some links on all of that. Yes.
Thank you for that, Barb. And for those of you that have read ahead or reviewed the document. I think it's important. It was important for MCP to note this governance structure and some of the options for the broader governance structure to include dispatch operations. Does certainly recognize the existence of the 911 board's governance structure and potentially takes that into account. Moving ahead.
I have a follow-up question, if I could. So Barb, I understand that, you mentioned that the 911 boards is based on legislative requirements. Do you all think that that's going to be a requirement for whatever future, the future governance structure that is developed, recommended by the task force to the legislature? Do you believe that'll need to be legislatively codified?
I'll let others chime in before I do, I guess. Well, hearing nothing, I guess I can go ahead and chime away, right?
Yeah.
It has worked well for the board, for the 911 board. It very clearly defines what our role is and what it is not. So, I mean, I think that's probably the surest way to ensure that whatever entity is responsible for this has the authority, clearly has the authority to do what it is supposed to be doing. And I suppose I'm trying to remember the other ways that governance solutions can be put together. One, I think, was by executive order, which is also fine. And what was the other? Just ad hoc, kind of ad hoc,
Yes.
informal. That would
Right.
not be a place I would want to go.
Okay.
Unless somebody could point out the advantages and disadvantages to that I might not be aware of. So.
Anything?
With these,
Go ahead.
it's tough with these working groups with the whole cart before the horse thing as to which working group work leads to the work of the others. I mean, if we're going under the assumption that, MCP's proposal that we end up in however many years down the road, that we're going to end up with 6 dispatch centers that are all entities of the state in some form, then yes, it makes sense that the governance would be set in statute like the 911 governance is. But under the current setup where, you've got 4 that are owned by 3 owned by municipalities, 1 by a sheriff's office, 2 by BSP. I don't think that Shelburne or Hartford or Lamoille County or St. Albans are going to be willing to sign on to a state level governance structure if they're still the ones running the show.
Right. That's a really good point. So maybe there's a happy medium in there somewhere.
With that said, do you think it's valuable to engage them, for us to have a conversation with them? I mean, obviously, Toby could serve as a liaison for this working group, but we have not had a conversation. No, we have had a conversation with the sheriff, Lamoille County Sheriff, and we had conversations with some other representatives of the non-state run PSAPs. And we have some input from them through over the course of the program. But what you said, Paul, would be concerning if we, I mean, either they're on board if it's legislatively directed or executive order enacted, they would have to be. But I think it might be concerning and very difficult to get their support if they haven't provided their input in advance. I don't know what you all think of that.
I mean, take that one step further even, I mentioned the 4 non-state PSAPs, but really there are, what was the final number we arrived at? 30 some odd like Chief Bingham, who's joining us today, he has a dispatch center in Newport. To tell him that he has to sign on to a state mandated governance structure for his local shop up there in Newport, I don't think that would be well received, and if you look at all the different dispatch centers of varying sizes and shapes and service levels, I don't, it's going to be tough to come up with some kind of a legislatively mandated governance structure that everybody has to sign on to when really there's no teeth for us to make them, or no, I don't almost say us. I don't want to give the impression we're pushing this, but that for the legislature to make them adhere.
Those are really good points. And, it's just running through my head if there was some sort of, we haven't even gotten this far in the discussion, but let's pretend let's pretend that there is that there's some money attached to this project, and that you have perhaps a state level entity that identifies best practices and standards or something. And so if any of these independent, in any of the existing dispatch centers want to access that money or the programs perhaps that this group would have, like maybe a CAD or something, then they would have to demonstrate that they are meeting those standards, right? But that wouldn't leave the actual governance of those centers, it would leave that alone, right? It would set the conditions for, if you want this state money, here's what you need to agree to do operationally, technically, perhaps, whatever. But it doesn't take the control away from them, even to join, right? Even to participate in it. That might leave questions of equity, though, right? What citizens are getting, what level of service are the citizens getting, whether if you're participating or not participating in this hypothetical thing I just came up with. So,
well, even in your hypothetical option, Barbara, I think one of the things you think about, like, we do that all the time as municipalities. We agree to do certain things in order to receive grant money. That's not abnormal. And the equity is based in whether we're willing to do those things. I mean, I know it seems ethereal, but if we're not willing to follow the state's instructions on how thick they want our asphalt, they're not going to give us the money to pave the road. It's pretty cut and dry, so it's not like it hasn't been done before. It's pretty, I don't necessarily think that's a bad approach. I mean, maybe I'm getting ahead here, but I see this as something more cohesive than that piecemealing it through that avenue. But like I said, it might be getting ahead of us.
Essentially, that's what the 911 board does right now with call handling, right? I mean, we've identified and put in place all of the guts of the system, right? All of the technical things, and we've done that in accordance with the national standards and all of that. And then with our agreements with the state PSAPs and the regional PSAPs, the agreements are the same. We say you need to use this equipment to do this function, and we'll train you how to do it. You need to follow these specific call handling protocols and procedures when you're on those 911 lines. And in return for that, we will give you a stipend each year, which essentially, based on the call volume and their performance metrics, gives them a chunk of a quite small, actually, PSAP reimbursement fund. It's just over 1.1 million right now. So for the regional PSAPs, their percentage of that, or their amount from that, is generally between 90 and maybe 110,000. So that barely pays for even one dispatcher, right? But it is a stipend that they receive. So that's the same kind of thing, right? And we don't force anyone to be a PSAP. we didn't force every dispatch center to become a PSAP. In fact, we wouldn't have allowed it, but that's the kind of arrangement I think that I was trying to describe there a few minutes ago, just dealing with other elements of the system.
I think that what you and Mike, Barb, just talked about, and again, under the foundation is what Paul said about others might not join if they're mandated. But the idea of having access to, I'll say benefits of, be they policy, procedure, funding, access to tools, whatever the carrot is. If so, Mike indicated existence of getting state funds or grants, and you indicate the 911 board. So what are the positive aspects of those agreements? I mean, I'd like to be sure that, yes, getting access to money is one thing, but, is that the only reason that the recipients of the grants, be they from the 911 board or from the state, are there elements that we need to be sure that we don't overlook in whatever governance model is recommended?
Well, I've always been a fan of the fact that the way we work with the PSAPs and frankly with the towns is a very good example of state and local county to collaboration, right? I guess as far as benefits for each community is they don't have to come up with their own 911 system. They don't have to identify the standards and best practices that need to be in place. They don't each have to hire all of the technical and database and GIS experts because it's done at that state level for 911. So there may be some economies of scale then. I think it would be critical to define, this goes back to what we started to talk about at the beginning, the definition of the governance structure, but what can be done at the state level that still allows for or encourages or supports the state and local approach. Now, that's just my opinion of what is a good thing, is to have that collaboration. But I would assume, Mike, that it works that way in many, many different places between state and local governments. So.
Yeah, it does.
Great. I think it's been an excellent discussion. Any further discussion before we move on? Okay, next few slides, I'll just go through quickly in case anyone wants a reference as to how each of the communications centers responded to the survey regarding the governance questions. So you can see here that of those that responded that report they have a governance agreement is Berry City, Brattleboro, Colebrook, which of course is out of state, and Essex, and Grafton, which is also out of state. Continuing on, we have Hartford.
May I ask a question? I'm sorry, may I ask you a question there too?
Absolutely. Go
So
for it.
the concept that we rely on, and they rely on Vermont. We rely on neighboring state centers for dispatching, and they rely on Vermont's business. To as we heard in some of our sessions. So what do you all think of the role of our neighboring dispatch centers are in a Vermont established communications governance model?
What's their role in a governance model?
Yeah, I mean, would they be joining it to continue? Would they need to follow our governance structure to provide services to us? Would they be, would they sign on to it? I it's a challenge we have, and I just throw out there for your, consideration for
So,
hear your thoughts.
Rick, can I try to rephrase what you're saying?
Yes,
think
sir,
you're saying, like,
absolutely.
As we're thinking about this, for the non-Vermont dispatch centers, if we're going to keep them in the loop because they are a critical part of how we operate today, how are we going to interact with them when it comes to governance? Is that what you're asking? Okay.
Yes, exactly.
And I think
Well said.
this is, again, maybe cart before the horse. I love that we have these partnerships today. I don't know if what we're doing is going to change that. If it does, then we don't. Maybe it's not something we even address. But if we continue to work with them, I think us having a governance structure and creating a specific segment about how we have those interactions for them is going to be critical. Especially, but it'll be helpful as well, right? They're going to look at that and say, okay, at least we know exactly how to interact in these situations. But we're going to have a segment specifically for those centers about how they're going to have to work with us.
Yeah.
Currently,
The-
for a lot of the border communities, especially the smaller border towns, they're really the only option for a lot of them at this
Right.
point. But if this whole master plan envisioned by MCP ever comes to fruition, then those border towns may have options. And I think if these out-of-state dispatch centers want to continue to have those border towns as customers, paying customers, that they may have to agree to at least certain parts of our governance structure in order to continue receiving that funding from our border towns.
Interesting. I'm not quite sure. I know what struck me about the stakeholder feedback sessions was when one of the out of state agencies was saying how they've invested in infrastructure to serve
Right.
Vermont communities, and
Right.
those arrangements have been in place for a long time. So I think I've probably lots of room for conversation around this, but on the surface of it, it would seem to me it would be a disservice to Vermonters in those communities to not allow, if you will, these out-of-state agreements. But how you work it into the governance piece of it is definitely going to be tricky.
Right. I mean, you're right. For many years, those out-of-state centers have been really the only option, the only lifeline for some of those border communities. And to now turn around and say, yeah, sorry, you're located in another state, we're not going to do business with you anymore. It's not fair, for one thing. And we're a long ways away from presenting options for those border communities, for them to have a reasonable option to go to.
Right. I think there would be. Oh, go ahead.
They have a pretty far reach too. I mean, I think even as far inland as like Groton is even covered by, I think, Hanover.
Right.
Hanover or the one north of that, I forget which, but
I think you're right. The other element of it is I don't think that Vermont would be inclined to be sending money to out-of-state agencies. So we'd have to figure out that piece as well. With the 911 system back in the day, every community was given the option of participating in the system or not, and every town did decide to participate. Certain entities, though, did not, including UVM. And so they wanted to maintain their own 911 center, which I believe was already in place at the time, and continue to use their own databases and infrastructure and all of that. And so there's a waiver process that they went through that allowed them to continue to operate in that manner. And they had to provide reports to us on the accuracy of their alley database. And they had to provide quality control of the call handling itself reports to us on a regular basis. And so maybe there's some waiver element that would allow Vermont agencies to partner with these out-of-state agencies as long as XYZ was being met. And presumably whatever groups running this show would determine, what are the very basic things that that should exist. I don't know.
Well, Barb, I really like the sound of that. Do you have,
Yeah.
do you know, would you have access to that document that we could see? I mean, I don't see how we're going to get around not having something similar based on what Paul just indicated. And I fully agree that while the towns neighboring, the border towns not having a previous option and now having a relationship that they apparently are happy with, removing that from them without giving them an option isn't an option.
Right.
And if we
Right.
don't have an option for them that they're comfortable with, or even if they do eventually get comfortable with, they're not going to abandon their service agreements with the out-of-state centers. So, being able to reference back something that the 911 board did to ensure the continuity of your operation would be good to have access to, because I think we're going to need it.
Yeah, I can certainly find the information on, that allowed waivers to happen. We may still have the original UVM waiver and the conditions that went along with it. Yes, I will find that. It's no longer the case that UVM actually sends their 911 calls to us now. So, but it was in place for quite a long time.
So can I flip the question around? Would we consider providing access to our neighbors, say to our radio network, to some of the capabilities that may become instead of a local network, a state network? Would we feel comfortable in doing that, expanding interoperability over some of our technologies, not at our cost, at their cost, of course?
If you're talking about state network, I think that would be a question for Corey or Dan.
When I say the state, I'm not referring to the existing state police network. I'm referring to a potential future state where, is a state network, or let's not call it a statewide. It's a governed communication network under our governance model.
We do that to some extent now with our CAD connections, right?
Mhm.
I believe we have CAD connections with Keene, and I know there's been conversations with other New Hampshire entities, and I can't recall right now if the connections were established or not. But that's a CAD, an alley dump, right? That's not.
All right, so you're
That's
Barb,
not really what we're talking about here.
Barb, you're not saying that Keene has a terminal with our Valcor system installed on it. You're talking about just a 911.
The 911 system feeds
Okay.
information to them,
Okay.
and they pull out what is in their area, and then it
Okay.
populates whatever system they have on their end.
Okay.
Right.
And don't want to interrupt good discussion, but just to complete this table, there's a couple more slides showing again which centers report having a governance agreement and how they responded to their other the other questions. And finally, this one here. So you see on this page, only Windham County and St. Johnsbury report having a governance agreement. So we have this if we want to refer back to any specific centers currently. Moving on, again, from the MCP document, we have what they identified for governance as the problem statement, and essentially indicating that existing agencies may benefit from strong leadership and strategic planning. Others have limited vision and inadequate governance frameworks. As we've already discussed, the governance landscape is very diverse throughout the 37 communication centers that are operating or dispatch Vermont agencies today. And there's also disparities in funding and promotion of standardization, et cetera. So they believe a concerted effort to address these challenges will provide better communication centers to meet the evolving needs of communities.
So, Dom, could you go back to that slide, please?
Yes, sir.
So clearly, the line in the sand, and I don't say we're drawing a line in the sand because we're gonna, pull one another on either side of the line. But local control has been the norm, and it's not only the norm; it's almost a given in Vermont. I mean, I love the way that Vermont does provide local governance, and we don't have in public safety, except for the 911 board, we don't really have any other models of regional or statewide governance. Now, so is this? Are there other examples from transportation or education or utilities or others that that other examples that we could draw on where local participation in a broader governance that we could draw on?
By mistake, so I had a transfer. Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Somebody was walking in the office.
What jumps into my mind, Rick, when you're saying all that is our communications union districts, which are regional efforts. I don't know a lot about them, but it might be worth looking at what their structure is.
And that what is it? That's the what kind of district again? I'm sorry.
Communications union districts, right?
You're right.
Yes.
And their mission is to bring fiber broadband throughout the state.
And I don't know if this is a dirty word here or not. I know it is in some other circles, but the regional planning commissions are similar, right? Like they really, in all honesty, they're connected to every municipality in their county. They have a fee-based system. They do grant-based work. They have a good structure around how they do those interactions. They have governance for all sorts of things. They manage land use. It's really probably the best reflection potentially of what we would want this to look like from that working relationship standpoint. The potential.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, those boundaries follow some different boundary levels. Then they're not, I think some of them equate to counties, but some of them are somewhat different than that.
Ours equates to the county. I don't know if some of them overlap.
Okay.
Yes, some of them encompass multiple counties.
Right.
Okay. There also are solid waste management districts. And of course, there's the big push now. That's the big hot button item in the state is, Rick, you mentioned education. The state is trying to boil over 100 school districts down to, well, the governor's proposal was down to 5, but I think they're going to arrive at something closer to 15 or 20.
Would they be good models to look at for pros and cons? Because we mentioned at least 4, that right now, and certainly the 911 is 5. So I mean, these models seem to be relevant and worth looking at. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you agree that that's something we should look at to just see so that we can benefit from what they've done and perhaps model what we do after the best of their support?
I think it'd be worthwhile definitely understanding their structure and operations better. I'm not sure the schools piece of it is ready for prime time yet, though, right? It's still in the definition
It was literally
Period.
just signed
Just-
within the last few days, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't there also legislative activity ongoing to look at whether or not the counties within Vermont should have
True.
more involvement in terms of
I kind of,
these
yeah,
types of?
you're right. There was a bill to look at sort of giving Vermont sort of the county government structure that we currently lack. And to be honest, it didn't seem to gain a lot of traction and I haven't been following it. So I'm not sure
Right.
where that stands.
It's sorry, go ahead, Barbara.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say it's probably many years away because there's not
Okay.
the active movement, but it is something that everyone is looking at in one way, shape, or form. Yeah.
I know Senator Hardy was heavily involved in that. And I almost think when the change in leadership at House Governance or House Government Operations, when that shifted, I think things slowed right down. I don't know if they came to a stop or completely or not. I suppose we could check in with Ruth.
Yeah, both House and Senate government ops committees had new chairs, so.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I go the second bullet there. The landscape of governance and organizational structures within communication centers is characterized by diverse practices and approaches. And so, I mean, that sentence says a lot. So what do we mean by diverse and what approaches? And so, I there's no doubt that, through inertia and through ad hoc decision making and strong leaderships and various measures or requirements at the local level facilitate what they develop their structures as. And so while it says diverse practices, I don't see what we mean. I'll go back and read further what they mean by diverse, but in our public safety communication world, there aren't too many ways to go in terms of I receive a 911 call, I dispatch, I notify. I mean, there's still some basics that no matter what are going to be followed. So I want to look at further what they meant, fully mean by diverse practices and approaches. But those diverse practices and approaches, if they are very arcane, they may or may not fit into a future governance model. So I just want to be sure that our governance model has to be inclusive in a way, but also can't, in my opinion, can't bow to certain structures or practices and approaches that aren't beneficial for the overall,
Right.
For the overall community.
Right.
So, okay, sorry. Thanks for indulging me.
Certainly. Any further discussion? Okay, next, MCP identified a number of benefits associated with what they term as a regional or state governance framework regarding public safety communications. And we can see this refers to providing a central coordination point for public safety partners and community, an opportunity to engage users in decision of technology, best practices. I think that's certainly one of the key ones, is we want all users to be involved and have some say in the technology and practices used in public safety. It would address the integration of new technology and how to implement that, develop a shared approach for dealing with technology challenges. Also, of course, fosters communications, joint decision-making, and builds partnerships between potentially diverse response organizations. Any additional thoughts on this or additional benefits to discuss? could this provide potentially the basis for some priorities that we would establish when evaluating potential governance structures?
I think they've laid out the benefits very clearly. They all make sense to me. I'm trying to decide if there's anything missing, but I don't think there is.
All right, great.
One thing that I do see missing is the cost. I mean, what are the cost benefits? I mean, savings. I mean, consolidation. I mean, governance can create policies, procedures, and document best practices. But at what cost and at what savings? And I think that's important. That because unfortunately, we don't have North Dakota oil money pumping in on a daily basis. Although I think Vermont's gold is your maple syrup, personally, and I don't ever have a pancake without the real deal Vermont maple syrup. So and there, and who doesn't want to spend a fall in Vermont? So there are things that. I think, I mean, our governance should really create an efficient organization that results in not only best services to the public safety services, and better safety for the responders, but also leads to economies of scale and financial savings. And I don't know how we could get around. I mean, it's not there, but my experience is that there are clearly, while there may be an initial capital investment, there are long-term cost savings benefits.
So that while you're talking, Rick, that sort of something popped into my head. A couple slides ago, we were talking about other entities that we could model after, whether it's regional planning commissions or communication union districts or solid waste districts.
Right.
And I think that a regional structure like that would be better received at the local level than would a state level from Montpelier forced down your throat type of governance.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
However, all of those entities that we named, regional planning commissions, solid waste districts, communication union districts, they all under the law are considered municipalities. They all have executive directors and staff. They all have the ability to levy taxes against the communities that they serve in order to fund their operations. And I don't know if we want to create another bureaucracy like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Next slide is trying to develop more discussion regarding what potential structures could be entertained for a governance structure and the challenges associated with those. Again, this is to foster further discussion. And one point I want to point out that it's not essential that we get through this entire presentation, certainly in the first meeting. So there's been a lot of good discussion along the way. We just want to continue to encourage that and work at the pace that makes most sense.
Yeah, our thinking behind this slide was, again, and we've been doing it all throughout, was
Right.
just to stimulate, conversation. I mean, knowing where we are and hearing your input, but there are some specific items that we're going to have to be more. There are items that we're going to have more specific input to. So this is just a few of those for consideration, and not necessarily ones we have to discuss now, but we could. It's up to you.
I don't know where it goes in this list, but earlier on we talked about, having a clear definition of what the governance structure, what we mean by that. So that goes somewhere. I think another component that's needed is to make sure that there are is that there is a mechanism for user engagement, right?
Yes. Hmm.
I mean, that might be beyond just the entity itself. There needs to be a mechanism for the users to get their opinions up through or to whatever level it needs to go to.
In order to get an example of best practice governance models in this realm, we're going to have to go out of state. I don't think there's anything in Vermont to be modeled after. I don't know of any. I don't know of any. I don't know of any communication center that has an actual. You know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't. You know, I don't know the whole state, but I get between my various prior jobs, I get around a lot, and I don't know that there's any dispatch center, any communication center that has a true governance structure where there is, you know, a board that, you know, potentially could override the chief or the sheriff or whoever is ultimately in charge of the entity providing the service.
Right. I mean, other than the 911 system.
Other
right?
than that, right, correct, right.
Because that exact thing can happen, right? The board can override a decision that or recommendation that I've brought.
Right.
So one of the models that MCP did, you know, provide more structure to, and which I know very well, and Televate has actually written a number of statewide governance models, and are familiar with a number of them where there are statewide communication networks. So we know this model well, but the one that Jackie Mines provided, she actually was she worked for the Department of Public Safety, but there was a group that their focus was the governance. And so they have regional governance that feed into a statewide governance. And so there's a regional committees, and then there are then they feed into the state committee. And the way that they try to keep it fair, and it's worked very,
You want me to
very well.
scroll ahead? You want me to scroll ahead to that?
Yeah, sure.
Are you talking about this one or the next one?
Let me see the next one. I think it's a pretty.
They're similar. This one kind of incorporates the enhanced 911 board and expands its expands its authority. This one keeps the enhanced 911 board separate and creates a similar governing board at you know, essentially the same level, but it also has regional input.
Either one, because we can't really decide what our future looks like. But the concept of having regional boards and then a state board, you know, means that at the local level where there's daily interoperability requirements, that they meet on a regular basis and they make decisions and advance interoperability that are best for that region. They then have representatives on the statewide governance body, and at the statewide, they make decisions that filter down to the regions, but also incorporate the region's input into them. And so while there's some, you know, there's this administrative responsibilities, because, you know, governance doesn't happen. It has to be administered. And her department, and when I worked for her and the state of Minnesota, you know, that there was an agency that you know, established meetings, agendas, and ran Robert's rules, and they elected the group elected the chair, co-chair, and so forth and so on. But it gave everyone an input at the regional level, and they supported regional level. They even had you know, members from the state group that would sit in on the meetings, but they would also, you know, they gave them the attention required. And so when you look at that model, that model that they have there has been adopted in other states. And so, yes, I think, Paul, to your point, we don't have this in the state, but we have, like it says there, the Emergency Communication Advisory Council at the bottom of the page was something, the ECAC was set up, with a similar intention, I think, or some supportive intention. Ours is much broader, of course, but you're not going to get to governance without, as you said, Barb, giving people an input. And you can't have everybody have an input, and you can't have you can't have a 10, 20 people from the regional all sit on the state. And, because there's just you can't function that way with too many people. But the idea of having, of regions that feed into a state governance is effective. And just this model here, I know works. I just don't know what the ECAC, what its advantages are, or could it be could we tool something after it?
You know that the ECAC grew out of the Public Safety Broadband Commission. Of course you do, because you worked with them, Rick.
Yes.
And I think Don, but I remember you specifically, Rick, at those meetings.
Yep.
So that was going through all of the decisions about FirstNet and whether the state should participate at the national level or go out on our own, and on and on. And then when those decisions were all made, that commission turned into, or was reconstituted, I guess, as the ECAC. And as has been noted many times, that organization has never met. It's an advisory organization. I believe it's advisory to the governor. I would want to make sure that it's separate from advisory, say, to the Commissioner of Public Safety or some other entity, because that could pose some problems as far as the local, the perception of the state running this thing, in particular Department of Public Safety, perhaps. I mean, that's a topic that has come up before. But then what does the ECAC do? I mean, it has all these regional subgroups coming to it. What authority does it have to do anything? I mean, it would probably need to be reestablished.
Well, you're right. As an advisory, they don't make, or that sounds like they can't make decisions without, they advise on decisions that are being made at another level. So.
Right. It would need, I mean, to do all of the things that are listed there, you need staff. You need a staff that works on this every single day and isn't just meeting, 4 or 5 times a year. So anyway,
the legislature would need to take action to make that to codify it in statute rather than it just being done by executive order, I would think.
I would think so.
In order to authorize the staff and the funding and all the things that we're envisioning that it would do.
Right.
I don't disagree with you. You can't have governance without it being administered.
Right.
I mean, because look how much time that the members of the task force are donating. Much. I mean, if you look at Paul, he's not on the payroll at all. And
right.
So we've got this won't happen ad hoc. Inertia won't make this happen. There has to be some structure to it. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's difficult enough as it is right now for the task force, because I mean, really, you could have a staff running around doing a lot of this work, each of them 40 hours a week. Instead, we have Rick and Dom, thankfully, and Elizabeth to help us along those ways. But yeah, so that would be a big thing, is how is the governing authority going to execute its work?
Okay, well, we've dove into one of the governance recommendations from MCP. I skipped over just a couple of slides here. And this one we've kind of discussed already in terms of the types of authority that can lead to a governance. I think, Paul, you brought this up right from the beginning, or maybe, I'm sorry, maybe it was Barb, the different types of ways to establish governance. And then there were the three options provided. Since looking at the time frame and noting we still have a couple other things on our agenda, probably don't have the time to get into detailed discussion of the three models. Maybe that's more appropriate for the next meeting. I think it is appropriate to discuss next steps, and then we have to jump back to our agenda after that. Here are some suggestions for next steps, and we've also got some action items I know that Elizabeth has recorded along the way. We just talked about the ECAC and reviewing the charter of that, the composition, other Vermont governance models. We talked about other organizations such as the Regional Planning Commission, the Communication Union Districts, etc. Are those some that we consider to review here?
I think so.
Okay, right. Are there additional experts, other people that we may want to consult during this process?
I'm curious as to when the right time to do that would be, especially because, kind of to Paul's point, it's hard for us to pick how we're going to do governance. We're not quite sure how the system's going to be designed out, so to speak, right? So I think there is a time, and maybe I'm wrong,
Yes.
but there is a time to bring in experts, but I think they're going to want answers that we don't necessarily have yet, and maybe that is a little later. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I fully agree with you, Mike.
That's interesting because I've always thought of this in terms of whoever is the governance model, whatever is the governance model, would be the one to lay out that path forward. But I got to take a step back here because the path forward is going to be defined by the task force. And at some point there will be a handoff to some other entity. So I guess I'm thinking about it a little bit out of order here.
And maybe I'm out of order, Barb. I'm not saying we aren't going to define that. Maybe we do, but I don't think we're at a point where we're bringing in experts either. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. When we get to that point, I think it would be helpful. It's probably not in their contract, but if Jackie Mines could come talk to us and explain, at least the model that she was familiar with, that might be helpful. Or maybe we can muddle through it. I know that when we were having discussions on the system planning report, she added a lot to the governance discussion that kind of smoothed some of my ruffled feathers on certain areas of it. So I guess that's what I'm remembering, and I appreciated hearing her perspectives on it. She's very knowledgeable. So
I thought we mentioned earlier about consulting with the Vermont legislature. There were a couple of individuals that we mentioned. So that's something we can do prior to the next meeting. Mike, I guess I'll ask for your input in terms of the League of Cities and Towns. Do you see a benefit at this point to reach out to them, or would that be something that might occur later on?
I'll connect with them, give them an update on where we're at, and see if they want to wait a little while or start now.
All right, thank you. And we talked earlier on, Barb, about the existing governance structure for the Enhanced 911 Board, and I think you have an action item to provide a link to their existing agreement for review.
yes.
All right.
Yes, and yes, so I'll give you a link to our statutory authority, that says what we can do, and then a link to the call handling agreements that we have in place. And jumping back a couple items, I'd be happy to reach out to Senator Hardy to see if I could get her take on where that county discussion
Okay,
left
please.
off and where she thinks it might be going, or who I
Yes.
should talk to.
Yeah,
if it's not-
that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Elizabeth, can you review some of the other action items that we accumulated along the discussion?
Okay, so in addition to what we just covered here, I assume Televate I assume this is Televate, is going to capture any additional or existing formal governance agreements that are currently in existence. Was that a Televate task or was that a task for
Yes.
someone else? Okay.
Yes, we're going to work with MCP to see if there's anything they did capture or anything that we can get our hands on from some of the existing communication centers.
Okay. I don't know if this counts as an action item, but one thing that was noted as being important was the definition of what a governance structure means to the group. Whether that's an action item
Yes,
or.
we can, Televate can put together some suggestions there as well.
Okay. Barb already kind of listed through the documentation that she intended to provide. Additionally, an example of a waiver was something that Rick had requested that Barb was, you indicated that you were likely able to provide. And that's what I captured.
Okay, great.
Yeah, outside of the
Thank you.
two, there's two more I have here. Mike to consult with League of Cities and Towns, and Barb to reach out to Senator Harding regarding county. I have those as action items
Right,
as well.
yeah,
Right.
yep.
Yep. So at this stage
Okay.
of of the presentation, I mean, we normally before this would have gone for public comment, but I don't believe any members of the public are still on the call.
Oh, well, there was, yeah, I'm sorry, I was gonna jump back to the agenda. Oops. Right now.
Chief Bingham dropped off.
Yeah, looks like
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, schedule.
We're still in order. We haven't jumped
Yep.
out of the sequence yet.
I
Yeah,
think
we
that-
need to talk about schedule for future meetings.
Yes.
Yeah. What we did in the last group was we just picked the time that we had established for that meeting and carried it forward the next 4 weeks at the same time. On Wednesday, of course, we have the regular task force meeting.
Right.
I don't know, maybe we might need a doodle poll on this one, Rick, because I don't know how these two feel about going to a task force meeting and then continuing on with the governance after that. That might be a heavy lift, though.
Yeah.
The task force meetings
also,
are pretty slow, pretty quick, go pretty quick. I
Yeah,
think.
that's true. Also, though, I do have every other Wednesday, I have a prior commitment at 1 o'clock, so
Okay,
this would be difficult for me.
okay.
I've got, just to throw out there, and I could probably jump on even while I've got some PTO coming up, so I'm gonna be out of the office, but depending on the time, I could probably make the meeting. So in all reality, a doodle poll would be great. Again, not to slow us up, but if we could get one of those turned around pretty quick, that'll be really helpful for me for the next few weeks.
Okay.
I think we should plan on like we did with the last one, at least 3 more meetings. We scheduled 3 out, right, Dom?
Yes.
Yes, we did. That's correct.
I think we should put all of the weeks. I think we should meet weekly, and I think we should put all of the weeks in the doodle poll.
All right.
And I suggest, Elizabeth, that we do 4 weeks in the event that we have no takers in any given week if Mike's on PTO. But I recommend we do a 4-week schedule just to see where it turns out.
Okay.
Right. Elizabeth, you can address that?
So that would be one single poll that includes multiple weeks, yes?
Yes,
Yes.
if you can do that. I don't know if that's possible.
I mean, there's an upper limit in terms of how many time slots I can offer, but I can always break it into 2 if I run out of space.
That works.
All right, because we're going to want, the goal is to have a selection for one of each week, one for each week.
Right.
So if that needs to be done as 4 separate polls, I don't think it's a big deal. But
No, whatever works. Right.
Well, and make sure that we, you know, Mike responded to the doodle poll, but I think we sent his meeting invitation to his Vermont partner. And
Yeah,
it
that
may
was
not be-
that was a mix up there.
I typically send to
Apologize for
both.
that.
So,
Okay.
that was a really good meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have
back
some
to you-
background
back to you,
noise,
Barb.
maybe from Mike.
Sorry, there's people talking in the other room in my sensitive mic. Yep.
Okay. All right. Oh, that's better. Thank you.
Sorry
okay.
about that.
That's all right. We're ready to move on, Dom?
Yes, back to you.
Okay. So you're right. I don't see anybody on the list that would do public comments. So I think we can move right to adjourning. And I did learn after the last meeting, I stumbled a little bit at the end there because I didn't know if we were supposed to adjourn with a vote or what, given that we were operating with a smaller group. But I have found that the working group should run the meetings just like any other meeting. The quorum, it would be 2 out of the 3. And so, yes, we do have to do a motion and a vote to adjourn. So Paul or Mike, if you're so inclined.
Mike, you're muted.
Now we
I
can't
think
hear you, Mike.
I'll make the motion to adjourn. This is.
Okay.
And I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor of adjourning for today, raise your hand or signify by saying aye. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'll get to work on these follow-ups from today. And also just note, I know I had follow-ups from the last meeting. Those should be all compiled and coming to you tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Barb.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you,
Thank you.
everyone. Appreciate it. Hey, Paul, just in closing, how is your granddaughter and your daughter doing?
They're doing great.
That's good to hear.
Grandson, but they're doing great.
Grandson,
We're still here in North Carolina. I had only planned to be gone from home 3 weeks. We're now pushing 4, and it looks like I may be driving home with the dogs on my own and leaving my wife here for a couple more weeks.
Ah, wow.
So, but
That
no,
sounds like fun.
other than trying to stretch the feedings out so somebody's not up every 2 hours, things are going well.
Congratulations.
Time
Congratulations.
takes care of that, as you remember, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
it can be
Well,
a long haul.
I was reminded recently that when my kids were in that phase, I was working nights.
Ah, yes. Uh-huh.
And I
Now
only
you're
took
paying your
2
penance. That's what they're
And
saying.
back then, I only took 2 weeks off from work because we didn't have this whole 12-week FMLA thing. So
Right.
Right.
Oh, wow. Well, good luck with all of that.
Fine.
And
Yeah.
thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.